Hi, this is Craig Stocks here for Utah Desert Remote Observatories, and in my last video we put together this HOO version of the WR134 region, and last night I had the opportunity to collect some more data, particularly oxygen data, and what I want to do today is go through how to incorporate new data with an image that you've already processed using the power of smart objects. So before we jump into this, I want to make a quick announcement. If you go to our website, you'll see that there's a link here now for the Southwest Utah Astrophotography Masterclass, and that's going to be held in St. George, Utah, September 10th through the 15th. Click on that banner and it will take you to a page with all of the details about the Masterclass. I'm teaming up with Dr. Christian Sase, the Chief Astronomer for itelescope.net, and between the two of us we're going to be teaching a combination, kind of an unusual combination I think, of Milky Way and deep sky astrophotography, because we have access to telescopes both at Utah Desert Remote Observatories as well as the global network from iTelescope. We'll have plenty of opportunity to capture fresh deep sky data based on the participants' input of what objects they'd like to image each night. But we also will be going out each night to do Milky Way photography. And then during the day, we'll have classes on doing Milky Way processing, star trails, light painting, as well as PixInsight and AstroPixel processor and Photoshop, my favorite. So it's going to be a jam-packed week. It's in the Courtyard Marriott in St. George. So check out the website, check out the links for more information, and we'd love to have you attend if you're available. So with that, let's jump back into our topic for the video. This is the image that we ended up with last time. And if you recall, it's just a simple HOO imaging where the oxygen is mapped to green and blue, and we did that by simply turning off the red channel. So we get green and blue from oxygen, and all that we have left from hydrogen then is the red. Little other detailed processing, threw some stars in for good measure, and we've got a finished image. But what do you do when you go back and collect more data and you want to incorporate it without starting from scratch? So that's what this video is all about, and it uses the power of smart objects along with some techniques in PixInsight. So first, let's jump into PixInsight, and this is the WBPP script that we used yesterday that had the hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. And what we want to do is add new data. So to do that, we'll go to our lights, we'll click on the plus lights, and go to the new day, which is May 10th. And this is the new data, and I've already gone through this with Blink to make sure these are all good subs. Click open, and that adds all that data into the data that we previously looked at. And if I look at the post calibration, you see now we're up to a little over 10 hours of total data. And if we look at just the oxygen, it's about 3 hours and 20 minutes. So that's getting to be a respectable amount. But we want to process this with the least amount of fuss and pain. So the first thing I'm going to do, I always set a pedestal value, and because I don't have a lot of data, I use a fairly high pedestal, so I'm going to use 900 for this, and that's near the maximum that you can use. The other thing we want to look at is the registration detail. Normally this would default to auto, and the WBPP script would just go through the metrics for each frame and find what it thinks is the best frame. Well, it's already done that, and what we want to do now is make sure it uses the same reference frame, so everything from this new combined data will line up and we can just drop it right in on top of the old data. So to do that, we'll change the mode to manual, and now we need to know what file we want to use as the reference. And to do that, I'm going to quickly go to the File Explorer, and just go to wherever your swap files are and go to the folder that has this target. And we want to go to the logs folder. And as I mentioned yesterday, I generally keep my folders sorted in descending date modified sequence, so the latest log is right here on top. If I double click on that, it will open in Notepad, and I can just do a quick find. I just did Control F, and I want to search for reference. So when I search for that, it's going to scroll down quite a ways down, and it's going to find the selection of the reference frame. And right here, we can see this is the frame that it used. It was one of the hydrogen frames, and then I've got the date, the time, and the time detail is 6:39. So what we need to do then is go back to our folder, find this frame, and reference that as the reference frame. So we just remember 6:39. We go back to our PixInsight, click on the link to choose a file, and we want to go to our original data. This time it's going to be earlier, and hydrogen 6:39 is right there. So click on that, click open, and now we have chosen that as the reference frame, and that will ensure this new data is aligned exactly with the data we ran yesterday, and that's kind of the first important step. Now, I've actually already run this, so we can just skip ahead. I'm going to exit out of this, and after this runs, we'll go to the swap files, and now we want the master folder. And here is the oxygen and hydrogen, and you notice they have the suffix of 4, saying this is the 4th time I've run this set of data. And open those. And at this point then we would just go through basically the same processing we did yesterday. I did have one question I wanted to address, and that was the settings I use for my more aggressive blur exterminator. And what I've done is I've taken the sharpen stars setting up to 0.32 and the adjust star halos down to -0.2. And I find that gives me a good result. I wouldn't say those are optimum. They work well for my telescope and optical train. You may find different values work better for you. But anyway, I would, just like I did yesterday, I'll run these through Blur Exterminator, do a stretch using a modified screen transfer function stretch, run Noise Exterminator, Star Exterminator, and then save those finished images. And just for reference, if we go look at one of the finished images, so here's the oxygen mono 4. So this is the stretched starless. That's what we ended up with after running the process. At this point now we go to Photoshop, and we want to substitute this new and improved integration for the one that we used yesterday. So let's hop into Photoshop. Here's the file we looked at yesterday, and this is part of the beauty of smart objects. And I didn't really spend much time talking about smart objects yesterday, but a smart object can be composed of any combination of layers, layer groups, other smart objects. If I wanted to do something to this entire image, I could select the whole image, convert this to a smart object, and then do something like, sharpen, noise reduction, do a high pass filter, any number of things I might do. I could even turn this whole image into a smart object and then use the Camera Raw plugin as a smart filter. But what we want to focus on is just the oxygen and then possibly just the hydrogen. But let's start with the oxygen. And if you recall yesterday, this is the layer that had the oxygen data, and we turned it into a smart object several times. We have an unsharp mask version, and then prior to that was a dust and scratches, and prior to that was a smart sharpen, and then prior to that was the actual base image. And what we need to do is work our way back and replace that base image with the new one, and then let everything else just flow through. So if I double click on a smart object, that will reopen the source data that is in that smart object. So let's double click on that, and it will open up just this layer, and there's the smart object, and there's the dust and scratches filter that we applied yesterday along with the mask, because we didn't want to apply the dust and scratches filter to the detail. And you can always press the backslash key and get a Ruby overlay of where it's applied and where it's not applied. But we want to go back another layer. So double click again, and you can see the tabs opening at the top. Here's our smart sharpen on a smart object. So double click one more time, and there's our base image. And what we want to do now is just go to File, Open, and what we want to do is go find that new oxygen that we just looked at in PixInsight. So we'll go to the folder where that's stored in the WR134, and here's our oxygen 4, fourth iteration. Just click Open, and it's going to open in another new tab. So we do need to rotate it 90 degrees, and notice I haven't done any cropping. If I had done any cropping of my data before, this wouldn't work because things would not be in the same place. So this is one of the reasons I never crop an image. I keep everything full, and yeah, there are some stacking and registration artifacts along the edges, and I just ignore those and I'll crop them out at the end. So image rotation, rotate 90 degrees clockwise. And now we probably have to redo some of the detailed retouching of the star removal artifacts. So I'm just going to grab the spot healing brush and just remove some of these small details. Sometimes it's a little tricky to figure out what's an artifact and what's an actual star or some detail. So if in doubt, leave it, and if you find out later it's creating a problem, you can always come back and adjust it later, because these are smart objects and nothing is ever cast in concrete. You maintain that complete non-destructive flexibility throughout the entire workflow, and that's one of the things I really like about this process. And I find I do best when I process images somewhat iteratively. I pretty much never process an image one time and wind up being happy with it when it's done. So I'm just knocking out some of the bigger artifacts. We've got this big flat area here that we need to take out. So I'm going to switch to the healing brush, make the brush a little bigger with the right bracket key, choose a spot to sample from. And the spot you choose is not real critical because Photoshop will find a way to blend it in. I'll switch back to the spot healing brush and take out some of these little artifacts that showed up there. And the last thing I want to look at is right here in the center. I'm not entirely sure how much of this is artifact and how much of this is actual data. So I think what I'm going to do is just darken it down and blend it in a little bit. And this is something you may have seen me do before. I'm going to add a blank layer right on top of the layer that I've been working on. I'm going to change it to soft light blending mode. And in soft light blending mode with a low opacity brush, and I'll set this to 5% opacity, which I can do just by tapping 0.5 quickly. Let me get to the brush tool here, and 0.5. And now I can paint with a black brush. Tap X, just change foreground, background colors. And I'm just going to darken this down a little bit so that it doesn't stand out so much, but I don't want to completely eliminate it. And sometimes it will look like you're not actually doing anything. Oh, there we go. What happened there is I wasn't on the brush tool, and when I set the opacity, intending to set the opacity for the brush, it set the opacity for the layer, and the layer was at 5%. Now we're back to the brush tool, 5% opacity, and now it's working correctly. And you can just make the brush bigger or smaller with the left and right bracket keys. And sometimes it pays to really work down at a very small level. And sometimes even 5% is too much because this is just very fine data here. So since this is just a demonstration, we'll call that good. And if I turn this layer off and on, we can see the effect that it has. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and apply this with the Control E because I may collect more data. So this may still be a bit of a throwaway layer tomorrow or the next day. And it looks like I've got a couple spots down here that I want to take out with the healing brush. And I just tapped the J key to switch to the spot healing brush. So now we've got this kind of cleaned up, ready to plug in. All I have to do is come up to the tab and let's see, I guess I never moved this over to the original. So this is actually the content of the smart object. This is the file that we just brought in. So we need to copy this over to this layer. So to do that, I'll tap the V key from the Move tool. I can click and drag and keep the button down, drag up to the tab where I want to drop it, drag down into the image, press the Shift key to tell it that you want it to drop it at exactly the same spot, and let go. And now there's our new one. And I'll just rename this so that we remember this was the iteration 4. And I can link these back and forth to see the difference. And there's certainly more contrast, more detail in this new version. So I'm just going to delete the old one. And now once again, I'll close this. It'll ask me if I want to save it. And when I say yes, what it's really doing is saving it into the smart object that it came from. So if you remember, the one before this was the sharpen smart object. So as soon as it's done saving, it will open, this tab will close, the next tab over will open, and we'll see the smart object with the there we go. So there is our new data with the Smart Sharpen applied. And we don't really have to do anything here. We can just close this, say yes, and it's saving, just going right back upstream. So it's saving this Smart Sharpen into the smart object that has the dust and scratches filter that we use to remove some of the residual star removal artifacts and smooth out some of that background. So there's that. We close this layer again, say yes, we want to save it, and now it's going all the way back to the original document with all three smart filters applied, the Smart Sharpen, dust and scratches, and then the unsharp mask that we used for local contrast. And there it is. So there is our, we haven't done any other adjustments. All we've done is substitute the new data into this document. You may find when you do that some of your levels adjustment might need to be revisited a little bit. And certainly now that we have more data in some of those faint areas, we might want to let a little bit more of that shine through. We have more contrast, so we can possibly reduce the highlights a little bit. And at this point, we're done with this, the new data that we loaded, so I can just close that, and we don't need to save that. So we've now substituted our new and improved cleaner oxygen into into this HOO version without having to reinvent the wheel. The trick to that was to make sure we use the same reference image so that everything was aligned, and using smart objects so that we're able to kind of work our way back in time, substitute in the new data, and then refresh and rebuild all the smart objects, which happens automatically. And let's just quickly do that with the hydrogen. So I'll open the hydrogen group. Here's our smart object that has the dust and scratches filter. So we'll double click on this. That will open the smart sharpen. Double click again. That will open our base layer. Go to File, Open. My bifocals don't work very well, it seems. And this time we want to load the hydrogen. And this was again the fourth iteration. And we'll do the same thing here. We'll rotate the image 90 degrees clockwise so that it lines up. And let's just go ahead and move this over to the layer that's going to be in the smart object. And I'll go back and close the one that we just opened since we've got it copied over now. So let's just rename this Hydrogen 4. And we'll take a quick look to see if there's any cleanup that we want to do. Looks like there's some here. So we'll just grab the spot healing brush and clean up some of these artifacts. There's not too many because the hydrogen filter generally gets the most exposure. Hydrogen is by far the most common gas in the universe. So most of the time, hydrogen is going to be your strongest signal. Not all the time, but certainly most of the time. And the stronger the signal, the less artifacts you get from star removal. It looks like we've got a little bit going on here, but it's really hard to tell. Maybe I'll smooth that out just a little bit because it looks like there should be a continuation of this line right here. So Alt-click to choose a source. There we go. Sometimes Photoshop can be a little cantankerous, especially when I'm recording a video also. So this was the original. This is the one that we just substituted in. Obviously it's processed a little bit differently, but again, we'll fine-tune that in the base image. So let's just delete the old one. We've got just our Oxygen 4 here now. And same thing, we just go back through, we close this tab and say yes, we want to save it, and it saves it into the smart object for Smart Sharpen and applies the smart filter to this layer so that we get the same Smart Sharpen, all of the same processing that we've already done. And here's that smart object with the Smart Sharpen filter. We'll close this, say yes, and it will get applied back into the base document that has the HOO image of this Wolf-Rayet region. And since this was a little bit brighter, we may find that we want to adjust the red, or we may like it. Let's do one other thing with this. Let's convert this to a smart object again. And let's see what happens if we try to enhance the local contrast. And there's two ways we can do that. One we did yesterday. I'm just going to filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. And by using a very large radius that does pretty much the same thing as the high pass filter, if you're familiar with that. So we can enhance that local contrast, and what it really does is bring out more of the variations between the light and dark areas, so you can see more texture. We can turn that off and on, and that's the difference it made. Fairly significant. Let's also look, instead of the unsharp mask, let's just go back to where we were, and let's do the camera raw filter. Sometimes this can be extremely powerful because it has a lot of really good presence tools. That would be texture, clarity, and dehaze, as well as contrast, saturation, brightness, all the tools, noise reduction, sharpening, all the same tools that you would find in Lightroom. In fact, it's the same processing engine whether you're talking about Lightroom or Camera Raw. So any settings that you use in Lightroom, you could also use in Camera Raw or vice versa. So what this is doing is opening this smart object into Camera Raw. And of course it's a monochrome image. But let's see what happens if we apply clarity and texture to this. And we'll even be somewhat aggressive with it because we're only applying this to the hydrogen data. No stars are being affected. We might even want to add a little bit of dehaze. Maybe throw in a little bit of contrast. Let's see what that looks like. So click OK. Now, since this was a smart object, this is being applied as a smart filter. So again, all of these settings are going to be saved just like any other smart filter. And that's the effect of adding that Camera Raw filter. That's without it and with it. And it's not as dramatic as the unsharp mask. And in fact, we can combine them. We can go to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and take this even further. That's a little strong. We can back down the amount, find something that looks good. We'll call that good and click OK. And then if we need to fine-tune the brightness and contrast, we still have our levels adjustment layer here that we can always play with the overall brightness and contrast of this layer to make it sing as best we can. So I guess kind of in a nutshell, that's how we went back to our original file, ran new data that we combined using the same registration field so that everything would line up properly, and then brought them in using the power of smart objects to update our file so that it now has the new and improved. We're now up to over 10 hours of data, 3.5 hours of data of just the oxygen. And of course you can do this with an SHO or any image that you've color mapped this way. So I'm sorry this rambled on so long. I was hoping this would be a short video, but I hope you found it useful. As always, if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments and I'll try to answer them as best I can. And beyond that, pay a visit to our website. Check out the Masterclass that's coming up in September. I think it's going to be a great experience if you have the time. And with that, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.